This was a case of a nurse at a hospital in Ballarat who was charged with the murder of a newly born baby. Strangely enough, nobody knew she was pregnant. It was a Saturday morning where she'd been working in the operating theatre. She was a big girl and wearing a form-concealing coverall smock covered her obvious pregnancy. And she was on duty till about midday when, being the weekend, her flatmate went off home somewhere around and she was left alone in the flat. Her roommate didn't even know she was pregnant, believe it or not. And she had her baby while she was seated on the toilet seat. So the baby was born into the toilet bowl. She took the baby and wrapped it dead in a newspaper and put it down the chute into the incinerator in the nurses' quarters at the hospital. That incinerator was only lit twice a week, not until the following Tuesday. And she spent the rest of the weekend in bed alone because she wasn't on duty. She resumed duty on Monday as though nothing had happened. On the Tuesday morning, when some employee was raking the incinerator ready to start it up again, they found the baby. There was a routine investigation. She was not under suspicion. And naturally, anybody who was in those quarters during the weekend was questioned by the police, including this girl. She panicked, blurted out, told the story, and she was charged with murder. When the case came to me, she'd already been committed for trial, and all I knew was the baby was still attached to a 2¼ pound placenta, joined by the umbilical cord, which was 8.5 inches long. Well, I didn't know what happened at a birth. I asked my wife. She'd had 2 children, and she was clueless. She was unconscious when they were born. So I didn't know what being joined to the cord meant and whether the cord was long or short. My instructing solicitor's wife had 5 children. She was equally ignorant of what took place because she was sedated at the birth. So the only alternative I had was to get the facts right, and I saw Professor Townsend in charge of, he was in the chair at Melbourne University, and he arranged for me to attend 7 births at the Women's Hospital, where the strange thing to me was the length of the umbilical cords. And some of them were up to 3 feet, nearly a metre long. And I said to the obstetrician, is it significant that the cord is 8.5 inches? Oh, he said, of course it is. I said, why? He said, well, it has to go from the placental site to the exit point. I said, well, how long's that? Oh, he said, probably about 10 inches. He said, the trouble we have is the cord is often so very long that it can wrap around a baby's neck and strangle it. Well, the thought I had in my mind, was it possible for a baby to breathe before it was born and be born dead? Because murder involves the taking of a life in being, and a life in law is not in being until it has a separate existence outside the body of its mother. So I was concerned to see whether it was possible So I knew, obviously, that there must have been presence of air in the lungs at the autopsy, otherwise she could not have been charged with murder. The point, for my mind, was when did that air get into the lungs? If it got into the lungs after the baby exited from the body of the mother, then murder was sustainable. And it was explained to me by the obstetrician, the baby travels down the umbilical cord like a yo-yo, and it gets to the end of it. I said, well, what happens if the cord isn't long enough to go from the placental site to the exit? Well, he said, the baby is jerked like a yo-yo and it must open its mouth. I said, that means it takes in air. He said, it takes in air. It also takes in amniotic fluid, and that baby will drown in the amniotic fluid unless there is immediate professional attention. So I said, a woman on her own in a situation like that, he said, it would be hopeless. So I could not have asked a sensible question if I hadn't seen this. And by asking the right questions, I elicited from the pathologist who did the autopsy that the baby must have breathed the moment it reached the end of the cord and before it was born. Therefore, it breathed before it was born and was born dead, and there was nothing the mother could have done. So she wasn't, she had no hope of being convicted.
This is interesting, did other barristers go to the same lengths as you did to prove such important points in a case?
I've no idea, but my approach to everything was to understand my problem, and that was a factual one. And I've always followed that. I mean, I later, after I took silk, became briefed in a number of patent actions. And I had never had a scientific lesson at school, neither in biology, any of the forms of science, chemistry, and I had to understand, in order to represent clients in patent actions, what was the innovative original step that entitled them to the protection of a patent. And the innovative step often involved the application of known principles to a new use. I can read about these things, but it doesn't register. Show it to me, and I can understand it. So I used to go to the factories or the laboratories, sit down alongside engineers and scientists while they showed me what was involved in the inventive step they claimed credit for. And I understood that. So perhaps due to my ignorance of chemical problems and scientific problems, I insisted on personal instruction. And that was always the way I worked.